Very insightful. Thanks for participating in my survey. That's interesting. So, heavy bowing group. Interesting to know. We're in chapter 17 of 2 Samuel today. Does that sound right to you guys?
Yes.
Chapter 17 of 2 Samuel. I want to lay a little bit of groundwork first. Tell me where this scripture comes from that says, what good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save him? Suppose there's and it gives this example. Suppose a brother or sister walks into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fancy clothes, and if you say to that rich person, "Hey, I got a seat for you. It's nice, sit up front, want some pizza." I'm ad-libbing a little bit, but here's a nice seat for you. But you say to that poor man, let's suppose a poor man also walked in. Use this illustration. In shabby clothes also comes in, and you say, "Well, you can sit on the floor." Do you remember what New Testament book talks about this little illustration? Somebody whispered it. It's the book of James. Yeah, James, the 2nd chapter, and I mixed it up a little bit. But that's the illustration it uses. Is it talks about faith and works, and it gives that example. At the very beginning, it says, "Don't show favoritism," and that's how the 2nd chapter starts. My brothers, as believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, don't show favoritism. What if you have this poor man and this rich man scenario? Well, you don't give the nice seat to the rich man and then exclude the poor man, right? That's called favoritism. It is a real problem. Where would you say we, as human beings, are tempted to show favoritism or play favorites? What's a common thing? Children. You mean your kid versus other people's kids?
No, you favor one of your own children.
One of your, okay, gotcha. One of your own. Anyone else? Any area where you're tempted to play favorites? Or where anyone's tempted to play favorites? That's a good one. Okay, just children. That's it. But it does happen in other places, right? I mean, I suppose in high school that happens occasionally, maybe. Relationships, perhaps. So many different things you're tempted to play favorites in. But I'm glad you mentioned the children one, because I agree with you, that's a big one. People are really tempted to play favorites among their children. And that's what gets David into so much trouble. If you take a step back, I think, whether he realized it or not, David played favorites with his son Absalom. His son Absalom was not a good guy, right? We've pretty well established that. He was manipulative, he was crafty, but what were the positive things that he had in his favor? What were some of those traits that he had?
Absalom?
He had
Was
what?
he his firstborn or something?
He had, oh man, that guy was patient. Yeah, he could wait as long as he needed to. What else did he have?
Who could?
What?
Who could?
Absalom.
Absalom?
Oh, he could wait as long as he needed to get what he needed. Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh.
What else? What else do we know about Absalom?
Good luck.
Good looks. Oh, the guy was beautiful. And that's how it describes him too. Remember this long, flowing hair? He would cut his hair. You remember every year he would cut his hair and it would weigh what? 5 pounds.
Are you serious?
5 pounds. He would get a neck ache from all the hair.
Wow.
And that's why he cut it, because his head got so heavy. And apparently that was, hair was just a sign of beauty back then. Wow. Poster boy over here. What else do we know about him? Well, along with those good looks, he had this charm about him too, right? He could walk up to you and sort of like the opposite of me. He'd walk up to you and you'd be like, "Ooh, I want to get to know you. I want to meet you. I want to talk to you." I had problems when I've had some very nice people in youth ministry that I tried to invite, and I would walk up to them, and it's as though they just scattered. They would run. And I couldn't figure it out. And later on, I'm kind of friends with them now, and they told me, "Yeah, you were scary. I didn't want you near me." Absalom, on the other hand, he knew how to get down on your level, even though he's the popular guy. So these are all traits in his favor. Now, what is the natural human tendency? Well, we are naturally inclined to look at these traits and we love them. We're like, wow, that's amazing. We gravitate towards anyone who's like a celebrity, and that's who this guy was. Unfortunately, though, you'd think the mature people would know better, but sometimes they don't. David, the man after God's own heart, you would think he would understand the difference between physical looks and spiritual looks. Remember how he was chosen to be king? The prophet Samuel came over and went through all his other brothers first before he got to David. Why did he go through all the other brothers first? And God said no every time and end up with David. Why? Because God said, hey, don't consider their height, their appearance. That's man stuff. Man looks at that outward appearance, but the Lord, what does he see? What does God see? He looks at the heart. He knows the true you. So if anyone should understand that, it's David. And to a certain degree, he does. He does. But if you look at the way he continues to treat his son Absalom, who, if we're going to be honest, Absalom, even though he had a beautiful physique, he had an ugly heart. He really did. Even at the deepest part of his heart, he was pretty messed up, which is a scary thought. A lot of times we think, oh, well, you know, they made some mistakes, but they got a good heart. Not everyone has a good heart. At least not Absalom. He didn't. But David didn't want to see that because it was his kid. He loved his child. And it seems like he was playing favorites, whether he realized it or not. He had a tendency to really love this child and really like everything that he did, even if it was an insult to him, you know, trying to attack him, it still was like, ooh, Absalom, wow, you know. And I think you'll kind of see that as we go on, but that is a fault that David had, and in the New Testament, it's strongly addressed when James talks about don't show favoritism. Don't treat people differently just because you see these external things that really don't matter. So that's a big lesson, and unfortunately, we have a hard time learning it in the church too, so it's important that we do. I want to read what we covered a little bit last week because it sets up where we are today. And so in chapter 16, around verse 15, it says, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said, long live the king, long live the king. Absalom said to Hushai, so this is the love you show your friend? If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him? Hushai said to Absalom, no, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by the men of Israel, his will I be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom shall I serve? Shall I not serve the son? Just as I have served your father, so I will serve you. Absalom said to Ahithophel, give us your advice. What should we do? Ahithophel answered, oh, and he gives that wretched advice, that horrible advice. Sleep with your father's concubines, that you left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute. So Absalom's like, okay, I'll do it. And of course he does. And then verse 23 ends that chapter, but it's still in the middle of the story. It says, now in those days the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. So, to pick up where we left off, David, his own son Absalom, has been crafty and waiting for his opportunity. He takes it and he rebels and he gets the people to say, hey, Absalom's king over here in Hebron. And David hears about it and he thinks, wait, I'm king. Absalom just said my son said he was king. That means he's going to grab an army and he's going to come over here and he's going to try to attack the city. And to attack a city, how do you defeat a city with walls? What do you do to it? You lay siege. You starve them out. Yeah. And you know what it feels like to go without food for any length of time. You're not very happy and you tend to get grumpy and stuff. Well, that's what they would do. And David knows, we cannot have a siege here. So he willingly leaves. And some people go with him. But he leaves the city of Jerusalem, and Absalom's going to make his way back there and take over the city. And it's at this particular time that we learn about the people who have defected with Absalom. And this guy, Ahithophel, is one of them. A very, very wise counselor. So wise that they say it's just like speaking to a prophet. That's pretty good. That's comparing his words to the words of God, basically. You don't do that with just any old person, but that's how they regarded what this guy said. He was endowed with a special, deep amount of wisdom. So, this guy has it, and he decides to side with Absalom. And then he gives this terrible kind of mean advice about, oh, I'll tell you what you do. Take all of David's concubines, his wives, and publicly sleep with them and humiliate them. Now, what was the purpose of that? Why do such a thing like that? What was his reasons that he gave for that? You remember? Basically, it was just to say, you and David are against each other now. That David is now your enemy. Well, couldn't you have just issued a statement or something? I mean, there are other ways to do that, right? There are other ways to say, hey, he and I aren't getting along, besides going to that extreme, right? So why this horrible advice? Well, because Ahithophel said. Why would Ahithophel say that? It's funny when I keep trying to say his name. And sometimes I'll say Ahithophel and then Ahithophel, so sorry about that. I'm just slurring it. But why would he give that advice? Well, we backtrack and we look at who this guy is. Who was he, you remember? Ahithophel's relation to Bathsheba?
Father or grandfather?
Grandfather, yeah, grandfather. He was related to Bathsheba, the very woman that David slept with and then had her husband killed so that he could marry her. And you wonder why he's eager to leave David and to give advice that would shame and hurt David and his wives. Well, yeah, that seems to be a great incentive for him. So David's got this huge problem and he prays to God because of it. He says, God, please frustrate his advice because he's smart, always gives good advice. And then another advisor, Hushai, shows up and David says, hey, I can't use you here, but you know where I can use you? Back there. If you go back in the city of Jerusalem and you pretend to be on Absalom's side, you could frustrate Ahithophel's advice. You could give him poor advice, and it would allow me to recoup a bit. And so that's what this loyal guy Hushai does. And that's where we pick it up in chapter 17. We already see that Absalom is listening to Ahithophel, and that's what really concerns David. So, chapter 17, Parker, could you read the first 4 verses for me?
Sure. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. And the advice seemed right in the eyes of Absalom and all the elders of Israel.
Okay, so Ahithophel is giving his counsel. Hey, Absalom, you want to win this battle? I'll tell you how to do it. Grab, what did he say, 12,000 men? Grab a bunch of men right now, not everyone, just a bunch, and go out there and pursue David. Why is he saying to do that so quickly? What's the reasoning, you think? Why not wait a little while?
So David would prepare himself, I guess.
Yeah, because if this is good advice, because David just ran. He just fled, and he doesn't even know who's exactly with him and who's not with him. He's in the process of running. So if you catch somebody off guard, it works a lot better. It's like if I were to walk over here and just slap Parker in the face as hard as I could. My guess is it would hurt a little bit more than if I said, hey Parker, I'm going to hit you in the face. All right, in just a few minutes I'm going to hit you in the face. All right, you see my hand? It's coming, it's coming. He would have a little bit of time to prepare himself, and it might not hurt as much. So, the surprise attack, the wonder of whether or not it's going to happen. The wonder is what gets people, right? And Ahithophel knows that. Ahithophel knows that David's at his mercy. because he's a smart guy and he has good advice. So Hushai is the other advisor there, and he's smart. He knows that is not what David should be doing. Or that is not what David needs for Absalom to do. I need to frustrate this guy's advice. So, verse 5, Absalom said, summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well. When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion. Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters, as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier whose heart is like the heart of a lion will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those with him are brave. So I advise you. That was all set up for his advice. Let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, be gathered to you, with you yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found. We will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it into the valley until not so much as a pebble is left. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel, for the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Now, think this through. We have two scenarios here of good advice and bad advice based on the circumstance, right? Now, just because the good advice comes from someone who's not so godly doesn't make it bad advice. It's still, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's like if you're a parent and your child says something that's true when you were wrong. You hate that. You just hate it. But it doesn't change the fact that this is still true. They're right. So we can learn from this. On first glance, Hushai does sound like he knows what he's talking about, right? He gives a long preamble. David's a fighter. He's been fighting for all these. I mean, as a teenager, he was killing bears and lions. Now, he's been so experienced. He's got all these men with him. They're fighters, and they know what to do when fleeing. He could probably have talked a while about how many times David fled from cave to cave, from this place to that, and managed to elude Saul. So he says, look, David's hiding in a cave. He's not even with the troops. You're never going to find him anyway. But if he ambushes you, if he does a sneak attack first, what's going to happen? Word's going to get out. Word's going to get around, and everyone's going to know Absalom's men have been attacked. David's coming back. And then everyone is just going to cower in fear, and your whole plan will be destroyed, all because you tried to follow this advice and rush it. So his advice was not to rush it. Now, on the first glance, can you see the sense of that, the logic of that? I can see that. He's saying things that are true about David. And then the advice that he gives, we got to admit, that's got to be a little bit appealing to a young prince. Let all Israel from all over be gathered to you until you're on Lord of the Rings and you've got the armies of Mordor out there. The ground is shaking. You see all of them in front of you, and then you march out, and wherever David is, they'll surround it. And forget a siege. We don't need to starve people out of the city. We'll take those to the city and we'll rip the thing down. That's what we'll do. There won't be a pebble left because of the size of the army that you have. Now, to a young guy, that sounds not half bad, actually. It's pretty good. And so you can see why immediately he's like, that is some great advice. Because it fed right into what he wanted to hear anyway. And isn't that amazing, by the way? If somebody smart tells you something that you wanted to hear anyway, you tend to believe it a little bit more. ooh, that guy's really smart and he's defending my view. Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. But the truth isn't always that way. So, what do we see from this advice? Well, we see a lot of facts were thrown around. It's sort of like politics. A lot of facts get thrown back and forth and stuff. But there still is truth of the matter here. And it's really easy to consider, this is, I guess how I'd say it, it's really easy to consider the danger of an action, going out right now, rushing it and trying to attack. But sometimes it's easy to forget about the danger of inaction. Do you understand that? It's really easy to consider, oh man, if we do that, there's a proverb about this. Oh, the sluggard says, oh, there's a lion in the street. There's a lion in the street. I can't go outside. I might get eaten. You know, whatever. It's really easy to consider how dangerous it would be to go do something. But sometimes we forget, what is the danger associated with you not doing anything? And that is the big mistake made here. There was an opportunity that he had, and Ahithophel knew it. If he had taken the troops and ran out there after David and caught him by surprise, that is the only way you're going to get this guy. If you give him any time to recoup, just like he did before, 600 men from who knows where, you know, street people, whatever they were, they gathered up, and he attracts people, and it just wouldn't work. So that's some things we have to keep in mind. I'm tempted to use illustrations personally, but I don't know if they're that helpful or not. Because it's just difficult things sometimes. Like Lacey and I, we bought our first house. She didn't even get to look at it before we put the offer down. That's how dangerous it was. But there's a reason why, because there was a crazy market back then. And it was a case where if you didn't do it that way, you didn't get a house for that price. It's just how it worked. Normally that is not good advice at all. So, and you could easily have had somebody talk me out of that. So, but I shouldn't have brought that up because that just begs more questions about how I handle money. So I don't normally do stuff like that. I don't run buying houses, and I couldn't if I wanted to anyway. Verse 15 is where we are now, I believe. All right. Could somebody read 15 through 17 for me?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so have I counseled you. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, do not stay tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. Through 17?
Yes, please.
Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting in Rogel. A female servant was to go and tell them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they were not to be seen entering the city.
Excellent. Sometimes you can never know how important you really are. The predicament David was in is we've got the city of Jerusalem. So if we're looking at it on a map, Jerusalem, we'll just say, is over in this area. That's where Absalom's taken refuge. And the only friends David has here are Hushai the Archite, the one that's trying to frustrate, the advisor, trying to frustrate Ahithophel. And then he's got the priest, Zadok and Abiathar, and their sons, which would be the two you mentioned, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, those two. So those are basically the only crew he has there in the city. David is over here by the Jordan River, and he's waiting to see what he needs to do to figure out, you know, do I stay here? Do I run and hide further? What do I do? But there's no way of him to know without a messenger coming. Well, here's the problem. Yeah, David has friends and they're working for him here, but there's no way to get the message from here to there. You see, we've got the people of the city, and we've got some messenger guys who could, you know, come and let David know. We've got that. But it's awfully suspicious to see messenger friends of David, like the sons of the priest, going over there and talking to the priest and then leaving again. That doesn't look right. We know they're friendly to David, or potentially, so that wouldn't work. So they enlisted the help of somebody. Who did it say that they got the help?
But oh, sorry.
Servant girl? Yeah.
A servant girl. What's her name? Exactly. We don't know what her name is. An unnamed servant girl. An unnamed servant girl. So that you wouldn't see. Yeah, they didn't use their cell phone. You're right. I don't know why. But it's because of this unnamed servant girl that word was sent to David, and David knew, I got to cross the Jordan, I got to run away, or else troops may come and get me. Basically, David's life might have been saved because of some unnamed servant girl. So, how important are you in God's kingdom? Well, the crazy thing is you can't really answer that. But I'm sure we tend to think, probably like this servant girl thinks, well, I'm just a messenger, and what else can I do? I can't, why can't I preach in front of people, or why can't I join the army and fight? Why can't I, all these other things that she couldn't do at that time. But yet what she did was the very thing that was needed. It saved his life. And what you or I do could be the very thing needed that saves people from an eternity away from God. So it's always something to think about. Some of the people that don't get a lot of recognition, but they are very, very important. Verse 18 says, "But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left at once and went to the house of a man in Behurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, 'Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan,' the two messenger boys who have been running to give David the message? The woman answered, 'They crossed over the brook.' The men searched. The woman answered, 'They crossed over the brook.' The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem." Now, they hadn't crossed over the brook. They were hiding in a well, right? So the woman told a lie, didn't she? Well, she definitely, what?
But did she? I mean,
Yeah, but did she? Well, here's the thing. When it comes to preserving life, and I need to do more studying on this because there have been times where it definitely does get challenging to think about. But when it comes to preserving somebody's life, the Bible never condemns anyone for misleading like that. The only illustration that I kind of like to use is kind of like an illustration of lesser evils, but not really. And you've heard me say it before. George Fall used this illustration. You're driving home, and everyone know where Nova Road is. It's that road in the middle of nowhere with nothing on it except crazy people who want to drive way too fast or something like that. And so you're driving at night on Nova Road. I hit my first pig on that road. You're driving at night, and then you see up in the distance, whoa, and you slam on your brakes. There's a baby lying in the middle of Nova Road. And you immediately think, whose child is this? What do we do? And so you take the baby and you put it in your car, and we say, well, there's no reception out here. We need to drive to safety. We need to go to a police station and drop off this child. But then what if the person next to you said, we can't do that. We do not have a child car seat. We don't have one. We need to leave the baby back where we found it because we have no car seat. Now, is it true that, you're supposed to have a car seat to drive? Yes, that is true. And as Christians, are we supposed to obey the law? Yeah, we're supposed to obey the law. That is also true. But there's this little issue of a child's life at stake that we'll just say trumps that issue at the moment, right? And so if someone wanted to be pharisaical about it and come up to you and say, no, I left that baby there because I was not going to break the law, would they have been wrong doing that?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. It would have been wrong for them to do that, to follow the letter of the law, because there was something way more important at stake. So does that kind of help? Yes, she misled them, but there was a reason, because something way more important was at stake. And by the way, God was on the side of that thing that was way more important at stake. Don't forget that fact. So why is this camera staring at me funny?
I hear it.
Oh, Roger, you got angry and kicked my camera. Roger's got all kinds of temper problems. No, I'm just kidding, Roger. Everyone knows you knows better. Could I get somebody to read for me verses 21 through 23.
I'll read. Then the two men crawled out of the well and hurried on to King David. Quick, they told him, cross the Jordan tonight. And they told him how
That's how I
Ahithophel had
feel, don't worry
advised
about
them to be captured and killed. So David and all the people with him went across the Jordan River during the night, and they were all on the other bank before dawn. When Ahithophel realized that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey, went to his hometown, set his affairs in order, and hanged himself. He died there and was buried in the family tomb.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have brought up that, because now every time you say his name, it's going to bother you. But he knew, Ahithophel knew that his advice should have been taken, and it wasn't. And he saw ahead and realized, I see where this is going. If this is the kind of guy who's going to be king, he's not going to make it. David's going to be king again. And when David's king again, odds are I'm not looking too good. So he decided, set his affairs in order, and he went ahead and he hanged himself. He ended his life. And if you think about it, the prayer of David was answered. Lord, please frustrate this man's advice. And it was his advice was turned to foolishness in a sense because they didn't listen to it. And he committed that ultimate act of foolishness when he gave up by killing himself. Now, that also worked to David's advantage if you think about it. Because if he didn't kill himself, he still would have been in the picture and he could have given more advice. He was still an advisor to the prince. And think there are going to be other situations where Absalom might have been able to make it out and do more damage to David or even win if he had the right advisor around him. But this guy, who knows, his pride or whatever, decided, I'm not going to do it. And he ended it right there. So even this bad thing that happened that he decided to do to himself was a prayer answered, in a sense. Verse 24, David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. Now, this guy Amasa, the one that he appoints as the captain of his military, he was the son of a proselyte man who had married Joab's mother. Now, what is a proselyte?
It's like a Gentile conversion.
Yeah, it's when a Gentile says, I want to be a Jew now. They were considered a proselyte. They changed over. And the custom was to go through a form of baptism in order to change from being a Gentile to a Jew. So they would do that. And this one married. So let's see, hold on. I'm so terrible at this too, sorry. He married Joab's mom. That would make those two cousins, wouldn't it? Amasa and Joab were both cousins fighting in a war against each other. Joab, captain of David's troops. Amasa, captain of Absalom's troops. So remember David's curse, his punishment that's going to happen as a result of his sin with Bathsheba? All kinds of family troubles. Your family is never going to be without turmoil. Well, this just proves that point. We got cousins of David fighting against each other, leading the troops. And that's just indicative of what's going on here. Verse 27, and both of them, by the way, they were both nephews of David too. So both his nephews are leading the troops fighting against each other. That name Nahash, it could be another word for Jesse, or it could be referring to Jesse's wife. We're not really clear on that. So Nahash could be another name that means Jesse, or it could be talking about Jesse's wife. But the relation was there. Verse 27 says, when David came to Mahanaim, Shobai, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Ammiel, from Lo-debar. I love reading about Lo-debar, because you know what Lo-debar means.
Lo-debar?
It means, doesn't matter.
Oh, that's right.
No and matter a thing, nothing. I come from nothing, nowhere. Who came from nowhere? Remember that guy?
No one.
Mephibosheth. His name was Mephibosheth, and he did call himself a nobody. I'm a nobody that lives in nowhere. And that's what Lo-debar actually means. Nothing, no matter, doesn't matter. And Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogelim brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. So even though David's run away again, he was king for a while, he's still king, but he's had to run away. God is allowing people to come to his aid and take care of him with all the food and supplies that he needs. Remember how we talked, what we said in the beginning? Faith without what is dead? Or faith without works, actions, deeds is dead. Well, these people didn't just say, oh yeah, I'm on David's side. No, they brought him what he needed when he needed it. They brought his troops what they needed when they needed it. And that's the kind of people we need to be. Are we on God's side? Well, I don't know. Do we sacrifice anything for him? Does our life change for him? Do we worship in that sense? That's how we know if we're on God's side or not. Any questions from this chapter before we jump into the next one? All right, chapter 18. I want to make some progress here. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed them over the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David set out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. He's the guy that had jumped in and joined David that we read about a little earlier. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. The king answered, I will do whatever seems best for you. So the king stood beside the gate while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. Now, Josephus says, and we have to take what he says with a grain of salt because sometimes we don't know where his sources are, and sometimes the historian Josephus was not completely accurate. But he says that David had 4,000 men at this point, which compared to what Absalom has is very small. A very small army compared to his son who he's going to face. But one of the things about David, and we have to examine his character. Why? Because David's a man after. Yeah. So we have to examine his character. He is boss. He is king. He says, I will go out and fight. And his minions, his troops, say, no, please don't. Why? Because they just want you. If they kill you, that's it. They win. So please just don't. David could have done what any boss or anyone in charge is tempted to do and say, excuse me, boss, you not. But instead, he steps back and he listens to the advice of those subordinates of his, those people down there, and he says, okay, whatever seems best to you guys. He wanted to be in this battle, but he didn't for the sake of his troops. I think there's some wisdom there, in the ministry side of things. When you're in charge for so long, your head, it's like a pump filling up your head with this just greatness of hot air or whatever. You don't want it to go to your head. You want to always remember we're still humans. We still make mistakes and we need help, and we're not perfect and stuff. Which, I know I'm kind of joking about this, but that is, in my opinion, that's one of the bigger dangers I've seen, is that throughout the years, people have idolized preachers as if they're some kind of super Christian. That is a scary thing, because sooner or later you find out they're not. They're just another Christian, which means they are saved by grace because they make mistakes. And you know what I mean? If that's how you find out. If you're putting your trust in a good Christian instead of in Jesus, you're going to be let down. And so it's tempting as if you're in leadership, it's tempting to just, I want you to believe it. I want you to believe I'm perfect. I want you to believe I don't make mistakes. So if I don't tell you otherwise, maybe, right? Maybe it'll just become general consensus. That's Seth. He's kind of a perfect guy, I guess. Never hear him doing anything wrong. well, that's what you said, and I just keep going, It's really easy to do that. It's a whole lot harder to do the opposite and just say, all right, I want to join a group that holds me accountable, and this is how I've messed up this week. Please pray for me. Because you're thinking, wait, what if they tell this person and this person tell it? What if word gets around to that table right there? What will they quit coming to my class? Will they, all kinds of dangerous things could happen as a result of us messing up. But we still messed up. And we still, that's the case of where we got to think how much more danger is happening because I'm not fully obeying God and I'm letting people think I'm something that I'm not. I'm being, what's that word where you pretend to be something? Yeah, hypocrite. Everyone likes those, right? Yeah. The king commanded Joab, verse 5, Abishai and Ittai, this is where we get the hint. We get the hint of how David views his son. Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of his commanders. Now, Josephus cuts him some slack and says that he prayed with the troops first. I don't know how Josephus knows that, but that's what he says. But then he gives them this command, really, please, for my sake, be gentle to this young man Absalom. Take care of him. That's understandable, because it's his son. But is that really reasonable? I mean, you consider you have an army that is way, way, way smaller than this huge army over here. What might be one of the best ways to win that battle without killing a whole bunch of people? I don't know. Kill their king? Take him out first? And if you do that, you might save a whole bunch of lives because that's the whole person they're fighting for. Everyone likes David if it weren't for Absalom. But David's own favoritism, whatever, his own desires said, no, just be gentle to him. That's not good advice. We understand why he feels that way, but at what cost? Is it really worth it to endanger the lives of so many other people just because you feel this way towards someone who's got a bad heart, con artist? So it's kind of sad. It's something to watch out for. And if you think about it, he calls his son, be gentle with the young man, Absalom. Why say that? He's old enough to be king and lead troops, and he spends years working. Why call him the young man? I don't know, maybe we're reading too much into this, but doesn't that just hint of something like, oh yeah, we were young. What is that they say? You gotta sow those wild oats. You make mistakes, you're just young, you don't know better. Yeah, it's almost, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I just feel like it's a way of hinting, like, he made some youthful mistakes. We're just going to kind of overlook those, and he'll grow up. He'll be better. But what he did is not youthful mistakes. It was calculated evil, is more like what it is. So, verse 6 says, David's army marched out in the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under, this is just one of those priceless passages. You just have to read it. As the mule went under thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair, while the mule he was riding just kept on going. When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Joab said to the man who had told him this, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. But the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you, Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. What is he saying by that? AKA, if I had actually hurt him and then I went to the king, you wouldn't have stood up for me. You would have been like, yep, he did it. Kill Absalom. And Joab's response is basically an agreement because he didn't deny it. He just said, I don't have time for this. He's going to just move on. So yeah, Joab's basically saying, you're right, I would have, but you still should have killed him. So it's funny some of the colorful analogies commentators come up with to describe, Absalom, just no place for him. He couldn't make it to heaven, didn't have a home down on earth, he just hangs there. I feel like that's reading in too much to scripture, but nonetheless, what a time to reflect. Do you think Absalom was riding his mule all by himself? I don't think so. I think he had people there with him. Well, where did those people go? They ran away. Think, he spent what, 4 years, 2 years? All those years trying to win the hearts of the people. He takes them into war. He gets caught hanging from his hair. He can't get out of this tree. And those very friends that he spent all that time with just run away as he's left dangling there, reflecting on his end, which is coming. Yeah. Did not work out for him. And in a real way, I guess you could say his beauty was his downfall, and his friends left him hanging. Can somebody read 14 through 18 for me?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel. For Joab restrained them. And they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest, and raised over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, everyone to his own home. Now Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day.
The reason why Absalom's monument is brought up at this particular moment most likely is because since he had no kids, he was probably going to be buried by it as kind of a token to the great Absalom who once was. That was kind of his backup plan. But that is not what actually happened. In battle, he was killed, and they just heaped up rocks over him. And he built a huge monument for himself, and he didn't even get to lie by it. And that kind of describes how he ended. Side note here, there is a monument in the region that you can visit today, and it's called Absalom's Pillar, I believe. Yeah, it's called Absalom's Pillar, but it's not old enough, so it's not the same one mentioned here. It's probably one that was made kind of as a token to the real thing, so just not to be distracted by that.
So then I have a little question.
Yeah.
Wasn't Josephus from Jesus' day?
Yeah.
So why is he writing about stuff that happened 600 years before him?
Because he was an historian.
So
that was his thing, writing history. And that's why he's quoted all the time, because he writes and writes and writes and writes all this historical stuff.
Oh.
And he did not just write about what happened in his day and age. He wrote all kinds of things.
Interesting.
Yeah. And some of what he says is pretty helpful, I think. Most of it I haven't read or anything. There's so much. But there are some things that he says that we know, that's not accurate.
Right.
So you don't want to take him too seriously, but he's just another source. Like whenever we say tradition says, what do we typically mean by that? Well, usually it's just the story that has been passed down by the Jews from generation to generation, says this is what happened. Maybe that's true, maybe not. It's not inspired or anything, so it's just an option that we have.
Thank you, Seth.
Yeah. So David won the battle, but if you think about it, was it really a win for David? 20,000 men died. Now it seems like, David is fighting against the enemy and the enemy loses. But that's not really the case. Not that many months earlier, everyone was under David. He was with his family, his nephews were here, he had this huge army, life was good. His son rebels, he runs away. That very same family is now at war with each other. And in order to get the kingdom back, 20,000 people had to die in battle. And then his own son also dies. Those were his own soldiers. Those were his own people just a little while earlier. So even though he won, I seriously doubt this feels like a win. Sometimes you might win an argument, but did you really win? You could win a debate, but did you really win? There are so many things like that. You might have good intentions. There are a lot of good Christian people that I think all they really want to do is they want to, I just want my friend to be immersed. They haven't obeyed the gospel and been baptized. But instead of going about it in a nice way, they memorize all the baptism verses and just fire them out like shotguns. I don't know. They just blast people with them. Well, that doesn't really win anyone over, does it? It doesn't really work all that well. And you just go right on down the list. Some people are right, but being right is not always the right thing at the moment. You know what I mean? It doesn't always help us win. And that's why God opposes the proud, but who does he give grace to?
Humble.
The humble. Who here is the most humble person? Sort of a side joke. Yeah, that's what God does. So, by the same token, David lost because his family was fighting. And God's church, we collectively are also God's family. And that means when we bicker and fight and not get along, one side might win, but in a real sense, nobody wins, right? It's the same thing. Because we're all a family and we're turning the battle inward instead of taking it out there where Satan is and attacking him with the gospel. So in 1 Corinthians 12, it talks about the church not only as the body collectively, but as a physical body, right? And a physical body has all these different parts, and some parts are pretty popular, The arm, what a nice, oh, this muscle, oh, that's great. Oh, the eye. But then there's that liver. Well, nobody even sees you. What good are you doing, Yeah, there are all those other parts that are like, the nose wants to be an eye. Why can't I be an eye? Well, a body with 3 eyes doesn't look right, and it doesn't function right either, right? The body is made so that all of it complements itself. Could you imagine what life would be like if all of you were together except this one arm? What is that called, by the way? Isn't that like a form of
Dyskinesia?
Wait, what?
Yeah, or you could say it's sort of like Tourette's or something too. It's not right. You don't look okay. You don't seem all together. And I wonder if a lot of times that's the church's witness. Yeah, I got my life together. Come meet Jesus. Well, that's why we got to be together instead of fighting. So on that note, let's go ahead and pray. Dear God, I want to pray that you would help us to find that unity that we know we have in you and that we want to continue to have. And God, we recognize that it does. It does cost us. It costs us our pride. We have to lay that down for an attitude of humility. God, we humbly do want to obey you. We don't want to just set obedience aside for the sake of some feeling unity. We want real unity based on you. And so please help us to have the kind of attitude that your son modeled for us, really loving others and being willing to sacrifice everything if that's what it takes. So please help us to get along and to win this victory that you've that you're going to bring. And thank you so much for allowing us to be on your side. What a privilege it is, and how much more room there is for more people to be there. So please help us as we try to recruit, and do that this week. It's in Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.
That's smart. My cousin said